Most of you know this past week I was in Costa Rica on a continuing education week. I think I get 2 of those weeks in 1 year here at Plymouth, and I am so glad to be back. I'm so glad to be with all of you in this space. It was really wonderful, and it was also different. The food was different, and the showering was different, and oh my gosh, it was so hot. Which there's a part of me that just really loved, and coming back to this freshness was just really great. So today we hear of 2 women, Shiphrah and Puah. And I picked this text before I left on my trip, so just so you know. I picked a lot of things before I left on the trip, which makes it funny then to come back and do the things. But I wanted to share an ancient wisdom story centered on women for Mother's Day. But I especially picked Shiphrah and Puah because they could not bear children themselves. And I'd like to think that this day, this Mother's Day, can be more than people who grow babies in their body, right? And so that's why I specifically chose them. Most people don't know these Egyptian midwives. We don't hear about them often. They're not normally taught about in our Sunday school classes. But they are women, they are these women that forever changed the course of our faith tradition. We don't love telling hard stories in church like this, but when we don't tell the hard stories, we lose out on learning about the precious gems like Shiphrah and Puah. When we don't tell this story in full, we don't teach our little girls and young women about the unsung female heroes of the Bible. We don't learn of the people who mothered and nurtured and loved fiercely in ways that are not mainstream. These 2 were midwives. That was their job, because they could not have babies themselves. This was the role of women who were barren, were to be midwives. Shiphrah and Puah were Egyptian midwives, and although they were Egyptian, their job was to deliver both Egyptian babies and Hebrew babies into the world. So they worked for the kingdom and were under the thumb of the Pharaoh. These 2 women are incredible characters in this story. And although they could not give birth as midwives, they gave birth no matter what. They were not biological mothers, but they were the mothers of the ancient world. Their wombs were barren, and they created a sacred womb for babies to enter into the world safely. They are profoundly brave and faithful. They could imagine a life outside of the systems of oppression and cultural norms of their time. These women invite us, it's an invitation, to birth such imagination and liberation in our time and place. They would make life out of love if their lives depended on it. These 2 women labored. They labored over hundreds of thousands of Egyptian and Hebrew pregnant women. We know that Pharaoh wanted the Hebrew baby boys to not come into this world, so he instructed the midwives to ensure they were not born. Pharaoh had been enslaving Hebrews for years. The Hebrews lived in poverty, enslaved in unimaginable and awful ways. The Pharaoh grew paranoid and afraid. Desperate to cling to power, he feared that the Hebrew population would grow too big and too strong, and if war broke out, his military would be defeated. Shiphrah and Puah were under the orders to kill the Hebrew boys. However, they would not follow Pharaoh's instructions, and they resisted. Even though they were Egyptians and were taught to hate the enslaved Hebrews, they refused. Even though their king told them to kill the boys of their enemies, they refused. They would not give in to hate. They would not give in to murder. They were here to bring life into the world, which is what they did. They chose love. They chose life. At deep personal risk, at the risk of their imprisonment and death, they chose love and saw the children of their enemies as their siblings and relatives. They said no to feeling superior. They said no to paranoid power. They said no to divisive hate. They said yes to and, a place of spacious possibilities. They said, we are Egyptian and we don't have to hate these other people. We are a part of the power structure and we don't have to give into feeling superior. We can say yes to love, life with our Egyptian and Hebrew sisters. Relatives for all of us, all one people. They said, and there is another way, a way of peace and love and life. So they said, and God's love is bigger than Pharaoh's fear. And God's love is bigger than our fear. And God's love is more powerful than Pharaoh's army. We all remember baby Moses, right? Because Moses came out of this story. A baby boy who would grow into a man and lead the Israelites to freedom. We know that story. He is known as the liberator of God's chosen. But what if we told this story more often? And what if we told the story of Shiphrah and Puah as the original liberators? The infertile Egyptian women who had the courage to say, and. So they said, sure, we'll midwife these women, and their babies will live. They dared to say, and God's love makes more sense than Pharaoh's fear. Shiphrah and Puah created a safe womb where new life could occur. They also created a special tent out of sight where women could come to give birth safely without anyone knowing. Those two were courageous, bold, and unafraid. They had the courage to say, and. A word that helps us pause and see a greater connection, a greater sense of possibility. They used the power of and made the world more beautiful and just. I just spent my week on study leave. I spent a week working, but outside the office and away from my typical ministerial work. I spent a week in reflection and reading and resting. In fact, the whole subject matter of my study leave was on rest, which I'm actually not very good at. So that's why I had to go and embark on this journey. And I was so tempted to call it off. A lot's going on in my household right now. A lot is going on at Plymouth right now. I was tempted to say, I'm needed here in Fort Collins. I need to work. I need to be productive. I went to Costa Rica anyway. I had to engage the power of and, that place of spacious possibility. I had to go off and take care of myself, study, pray, and do yoga. I had to find a time to be still. I had to walk the beach in the morning, far away from the stresses of everyday life. Everything in me was saying, you have to be productive. You have to be busy. You have to stay back in Colorado. How can you leave now? But I heard a deeper voice saying, have the courage to be in the and, the place of spaciousness and possibility. It was important for me to spend time away on the beach in Costa Rica reading about the power of rest and renewal, and actually resting and renewing. Those two midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, who I fell in love with several years ago, show us how to have courage, to say yes to the power of and, the place of spacious possibility. I find them so inspiring, and they gave me the courage to say and. And I pray that you find the courage to be in the and, that place where new life and possibility can grow.